ceramics also make up a large portion of the portable artworks that are associated with Chavín, with the art style as well as with, we believe, the traditions and ideology that is associated with Chavín de Huántar. I'm going to show you just some examples. They're going to be very diverse. Each of them comes from a separate location, and usually that location is associated with the name of the art style. This one is Kupasnike. It's figure 40 in our textbook. I'm going to suggest that you just think of these as samples of coastal Chavín because they exist essentially along the coast, whereas the site of Chavín de Huántar is in the highlands. Kupasnike style is usually blackware, and that blackware is highly burnished, so it's brought to a high sheen. The object has been carved in relief when the clay was still soft enough to carve so that the figures can project forward. Characteristically, it is very difficult to read, and in that sense, it is also linked with Chavín. I think we can find a head right over here. And if we go up here, we're going to find the iris that is suspended from the top of the eye. In addition to that head, we have serpentine lines that link that head to what I believe to be, I can't see it all, but I believe to be another head. Kupasnike objects tend to be very monumental, kind of muscular, I think works as a way to describe them, and fairly bold in their carving. And they have a prominent lip, and that's what this thing is up here, the lip at the top of the spout of the vessel. This is slightly different, coming from a different region. This is figure 41 in our textbook, and it is known as Santa Ana ware, but I think we're going to live with coastal Chavín also. It's different. It's a little earlier than Kupasnike. It's characterized by its red and black, so it's vividly colored, but it also conveys this kind of continuous sweeping or undulating line. In this particular image, I'm going to say there's a little bit of playfulness as one form literally morphs into another. As we take a look at the head and maybe go over here, you can see again the iris suspended. You can see the mouth with, I'm going to say the curling lip and the teeth. I'm going to go with fang down here this time. And then if you proceed from the top of the head of our figure, that's its hair. And this does remind me of a trophy head, so that may be what this is depicting. And we continue that line, and if we continue it over here, it's going to take us into another figure, but this time that line is going to terminate in the tongue of the second figure. So there's an interconnection, there's a playfulness, and there's an exchange essentially of body parts that is typical of Chavín. Nevertheless, in the same instant, this would convey the ideas of Chavín and also the art style of Chavín. This is my last example of coastal Chavín. It comes from a place called Tembladera. That's the style name. Actually, the origin site is the Hecatepec Valley. It depicts two shells that have been wedded together, and I do want to stress the idea of the fact that they are intertwined. It does depict a strombus and a spondylus, and what that should immediately suggest is the idea of dualism. And that idea of dualism can in fact go back to Chavín and is very clearly linked with the figure we've already seen in the last video, the last talkie, that is in the lower right, and that is the figure with the snaky hair and the snaky belt. And he is holding a strombus and a spondylus. These two shells, as we learned, are gendered, and it is the strombus that represents the female and the spondylus that represents the male. So we have two opposites coming together. This we're pretty familiar with for the Andes because it does represent dualism, but I think this is a good place to use the word tinku, which you can find explained in our textbook on page 18. It is an idea that's an important part of Andean heritage, and the quote that our author gives us is that tinku, quote, is a convergence of two to make a third. What I would like to stress is the idea of convergence, a kind of encounter between two opposites. Sometimes these opposites might be forces, and the encounter, in fact, might be a forceful one, as, for example, two rivers run in to create one. Out of this connection, though, the end product is a unity that represents balance and harmony, and it does show up with the shape of our vessel itself, coming up, and this again is a stirrup spout vessel, and the stirrup spout literally looks like a horsey stirrup, but it has one side and a second side, and they come together in tinku. The two halves merging together to create a single whole, just as the two shells underneath in opposition are wedded together. This particular style is a little easier to read, and it is, I guess I would say, well known for some of its more naturalistic depictions. The shells are pretty easy to identify and well made, and also the very high burnish that is a part of the surface quality of our structure. This helps us to remember that portable art, the things that are small enough and easy enough to carry and move around, particularly through the trade networks, or perhaps as an object you acquire on pilgrimage to the site of Chavín de Huántar itself, that these things help to spread and continue Chavín. Not just the belief system, but also the symbols that help to fortify that system and the art style that represents it. We will continue for the rest of the history of the Andes to look at stirrup spout vessels, for example. We're also going to see fanged deities again, and certainly the staff god is going to continue. These are going to be spread through trade and through travel. To finish, the rest of my slide is borrowed from the Pre-Columbian Society in New York City from a talk I recently attended. And I like the slide because it helps to sum up where we are currently with the state of Chavín and all of the coastal Chavín communities that are producing Chavín-like art. The original idea was that Chavín was the mother culture and that everybody borrowed from Chavín. Today, however, we know that some of those coastal communities were actually producing works in Chavín, quote unquote, the Chavín style, before the site of Chavín de Huántar was built. So we have to frame Chavín in a new way, realizing that Chavín is taking the ideas that already exist and blending them into something much stronger, much more powerful, into a true cult center, and elevating the Chavín religion and also the Chavín art style along with it. So today we tend to look at Chavín as an interaction sphere. This means that there were independent communities that shared a single religious belief system, and that these folks communicated with each other along trade networks. This is characteristic of the peoples who lived in the Andes throughout the history that we know of. This means that from the north coast to the south coast and the highlands, there was a shared culture in terms of both art and belief systems. This also gave a sense of unity or identity, and that's why this period in time is referred to as the early horizon. Horizon meaning basically a shared cultural existence. Included in that, and I'd like you to go to the last point on the slide, we have a religious system that emphasizes shamanic transformation. Transformation is going to remain particularly important. Shamans still exist in Peru today. Many times the shamans will travel using hallucinogens, and that is something that still indeed happens today. The style of art, as well as the religion, often draws on lowland animals. By that in particular, we're talking about jungle animals, big, powerful ones, the crocodilian forms, but also notably the jaguar. And rituals that take place in very monumental and often open public spaces. Much of what we find here is going to continue throughout the history of the Andes.